Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Blues Talk. Jason Cappy with us this week. World Rugby have sent him to tackle school after his last performance for the Lansdowne over 60s. Nothing wrong with his tackle as such, it's just that he kept getting it out. Anyway, this week we're going to be looking back at the last weekend of European action, a good weekend of action, and we're going to take a look forward at Ireland's Six Nations squad, which was announced earlier today. Okay, so we start by taking a look back at Leinster's win over Gloucester in Kingsholm. Gloucester, a proud club. Kingsholm is a tough place to go. Leinster made it look pretty easy.
Well, yeah, it's a tough place to go, and they had their best available team, if not their best team out. Um, they were kind of humbled by us 59-0 at home, or 57-0 was it? And when we were at home, and I expected them to come out fighting with just like you always say, Dave, English teams will always give you a fight no matter whether they have anything to play for or not. And that's what I was expecting. But unfortunately, while they weren't a bit like the home game for us, where they weren't short of effort, they were short of handling skills and several other factors that couldn't get them over the line. Although they were denied by us on two occasions, which we got a yellow card for. Should have just conceded a try, really. That would have been 5 points and maybe seven, and no player sent off, whereas the way it went. Although people have pointed out subsequently that you can give away a penalty try, or sorry, you can make it look like the opposition have given away a penalty try by just collapsing it yourself on top of one of their players. I'm not saying that happened. I'm just saying
It certainly didn't happen for the second one anyway.
no.
Yeah, I thought we started off and we were playing at a pace and with a level of deception and a level of skill that I don't think Gloucester were quite expecting. Or if they were expecting, there was very little they could do about it. It's okay. The first try when we put Larmour through the hole, Larmour had the easy job. He just had to run through the hole. It was all the other guys around him who convinced the Gloucester players, actually, no, it's that guy, no, it's that guy, no, it's that guy, and in the end, it was the other guy. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of that kind of sleight of hand, and I've said it before about New Zealand, that New Zealand don't do anything special, but what they do really, really well, and they do it at amazing pace. And I think that's what did certainly for the first part of that match.
Yeah, the forward try was a thing of beauty as well. We've done that a few times now with either Dan Sheehan usually or somebody else going for the line. Dan Sheehan can make it from 5 yards quite often on his own. I've seen him do that a couple of times, just go for the line and do it. But he's been flicking it out the back door a few times lately, and I think it was Doris got it this time, was it?
Yeah.
Doris?
No, it was Michael Alatoa was the first beneficiary.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry, you're right. So that's great to see the forwards do that kind of stuff near in rather than what most teams do, just bish bash bush. Yeah, we're going to get over. We'll just keep at it. And Leinster have done it for years as well. But it's just nice to see a bit of variation in that. I wonder, is that Andrew Goodman's
I don't
coaching?
know, but do you know what it reminds me of? It's kind of like the forwards version of that loop that Alan Gaffney brought into Leinster, and we've used
Yeah.
ever since because it creates so many indecision points for defenders. If you don't go with the first guy, he'll just go straight through. If you do go on the first guy, he's going to pull it back behind, and the other guy goes. So that kind of thing with only in a forwards context, in a short penalty context, where okay, if you don't take the guy who's charging for the line, he'll go over. If you do concentrate on him, he's going to pop it out the back to Michael Alatoa or to Scott Penny, like we saw against Munster. Like against Munster, we saw two kind of short penalty tries. One where they tried a clever play and it worked, and then on the second one, Munster were so set up for that clever play. Sheehan just charged over, and the same thing happened against Gloucester. We tried the clever play with Alatoa. And then for the one for Doris, it was a bit more straightforward. It was just hard up and then one out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just thought it showed some, obviously some new thinking has gone into the not just bash it over and try and overpower them with your forwards, which could have been another option for us.
Well,
um,
that's it. I mean, it does, like you say, it's about it again. It's about causing doubt in the minds of the defenders.
Yeah, we seem to be doing that pretty well. Ross Byrne had a cracking game and really has started to. He's had two criticisms in the past. One is that he's not quick enough or athletic enough or whatever, which A, it's a bit harsh, and B, it's not a skill you can learn. However, the other thing is that he never took the ball. He never played close enough to the line, like Sexton does. Sexton goes right to the line, tackles with his face or leads with his face or whatever, and just creates doubt. Like you say, commits the last tackler before he ever thinks of offloading the ball. And Ross has started to do that a lot more now. He's come much closer to he's creating. He's quite a creative out half. I mean, people look at his get out of jail boot against Australia that time in the autumn internationals, but they don't necessarily look at him as a creative out half. But he's really becoming one. And he's not. What is he? 27. He's not that old.
Like all great
10 years
out
younger than Sexton, nearly.
like all great out halves, for me, his greatest skill is he's a facilitator. He allows the other players around him. He facilitates the other players around him doing what they're best at, and they play off him. And the other thing about that is, that is a criticism that's made of him, and not entirely an unfair criticism in terms of him playing on the line, and he does lack for he's not as pacey as other players. But with the way Leinster play nowadays, as often as not, the first receiver isn't Ross Byrne. And somebody who's coming up hard on the first receiver and meets Ross Maloney there is in for a shock.
Just a little, yeah. And Ross Maloney, as we said before, is an excellent distributor at that point. Like Ali Muldowney used to be for Connacht, he can fulfill that role very well, which is a great skill. I don't know, it doesn't seem to have got him into the Ireland squad, but we live in hope. Double-sided hope.
Well, we'll come to that later. But you can see how important he is for Leinster. He is a glue player for Leinster. He does stick a lot of different parts of the game together.
One little word before we leave Ross Byrne is little tap on for the try. Oh, that was a thing of beauty. Just pure reaction and skill, and it's one for the highlights reel. Anyway, carry on.
That was superb, actually. One criticism that's been leveled at Leinster, not entirely fairly, I think, is the performance of our scrum. When somebody drilled down into it, our scrum actually didn't perform all that badly at all. I think there's a tendency to criticise Leinster scrum for not being dominant because we don't use it as a way of milking penalties. We just we do that old Mick Doyle thing. It's a way of restarting play. You tie in 8 of their guys, and if you've got 2 quick guys at the back like Quaylen Doris and Jemison Gibson Park, by the time the opposition stand up, the ball's 30 yards away.
Yeah, and it's noticeable that we do that. We even if we have the ascendancy in the scrum, we want fast ball. We don't give a shite about whether we get a penalty or not. Obviously, it depends on the game and all of that. If it's a soaking wet day and it's a tight game, it might be different. But generally, like you say, we don't want to humiliate the other team. Like that seems to be an end in itself for some scrummaging team. They wanted their dominance has to be met out over this other team, and it doesn't really matter about anything else as long as we can dominate them in the scrum.
There's a lot of misplaced machismo goes into discussion around the scrum, and I'll tell you, there's nothing more macho than dotting the ball down over the line. So
there you go. Point at the scoreboard and go, good scrum, lads. Still losing 36-0.
One other area that was criticised, and again probably fairly, I think, was our maul defence, because we didn't seem to do it. I don't know. I think there was a confidence in the team, particularly in the if you like, in the jumpers, that they could take the line out.
We put men in the air, too close to the line, which is it's not a conservative thing to do, but it's the kind of thing you can afford to do when you're well ahead as well. And it's spectacular if you pull it off, and you've got the ball back, and it really demoralizes the attacking team. That they can't even run, because that's the famous Gloucester's big weapon is their line out ball, like Exeter. That seems to be where they get a lot of their scores. So if we took that weapon away from them, it's the old hammer the hammer thing. Now, unfortunately, it didn't work out for us, and we gave away 2 yellow cards and 2 penalty tries. But in the scheme of things, it didn't matter. On another day against another team,
Gloucester obviously haven't been watching the last couple of Leinster games and seeing the amount of points we've scored while we've had men down.
Yeah, well, that's not something you're going to rely on, Dave. I don't think any coach is going to say, "Oh, it's all right, lads."
I mean, it is an extraordinary run actually. In the last, what was it, 3 of the last 4 games, we've lost men and scored multiple points under caution, as they say in motor racing. Yeah, so it was a good result for us. It put us in the dominant position in the group with 1 game left and a team coming to Dublin who have to go all balls out to have a chance, and that gives you opposition. That gives you opportunities against a team that can be windy at the best times.
Yeah, like the end of the day, it's our pitch in Aviva Stadium. It's looking like it might go close to sold out. I think it might sell out, but it's well on the way, and we don't need to light any blue touch paper or retreat to a safe distance. All we need to do is win by a point, and the next closest team will have to score. Will have to win by a clear 85 points or something like that to catch us.
So, yeah, and I don't think Bourgoin are in it this year.
Yeah. So, either Saracens or Sharks. Our group's actually quite cut and dried compared to the other group. The other group has a lot of moving parts, but our group is simple enough if we just win our game. Doesn't matter if it's 6-5, 3-0. Don't have to, obviously you want to entertain 45, 50,000 people, but apart from that, you don't need to take too many risks, is my point. So I can see us being a little bit more conservative and making sure that we don't basically lose the game, because that's the only thing that's going to stop us topping our group. And once we do that, sure, we could, looking like it might be Ulster. Ulster are the most likely candidates for the last 16 against us, but a lot of like I say, a lot of moving parts in that group.
There's a lot of moving parts down that end. At the top, as you say, it's fairly cut and dried. But from we'll say 5 through 9, 5 through 10, there's a lot of slips can happen twixt cup and lip there.
Well, it's the other group rather than the high.
Oh yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Like the high part of that group, all the first 3 teams are on 13 points, and they're all playing games they could easily win. So that means that group is going to come down to point. For the top 3 places, it's going to come down to points difference, bonus points, all of that. So there'll be a lot of moving parts at the top, and the same at the bottom. Ulster, Claremont. I think Munster look fairly safe. I'm not sure if they're mathematically safe, but they're close enough. And it's up to Ulster to rack up the points against Sale.
Munster, well, we'll talk about future fixtures, but Munster do have a tricky fixture.
Oh, absolutely, but they're on 9 points, and I think they'll probably get through with 9 points.
Yeah, no, I agree.
They're going to end up in 8th place or 7th place, more likely. Like Munster 7, Ulster 8 is probably a likely thing in that group, but Claremont could clear the pitch there.
One thing we saw, I don't know if you watched, did you see Racing Metro against Glasgow last Sunday?
I didn't.
It was one of the games of the season. It was an absolute cracker. But what happened was that Glasgow had to go for it because they'd fallen behind and they had to play jouer rugby, and Racing Metro love that. I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. The way to beat Racing Metro on Saturday is to give the ball vitamin D deficiency. Because unlike a lot of other French teams, Racing have they have a big pack, but they don't have a monster pack. It's not a monstrous pack. They're without Cameron Wokey, who's a huge loss for them. So it's a game that we could go to a more low-numbered game.
Like I say, I think we'll be probably a little conservative. We won't be flashing the ball around, taking risks as much.
Not until we've established a beachhead or something. Anyway, looking at some of the other games, Munster had a game that's been played a lot over the history of European rugby, and usually has something to recommend. It is Munster against Saints.
Yeah.
Saints came to Limerick and were abject initially. Munster were destroying them, and then Jack O'Donoghue got a red card, and it was a red card. I mean, the weird thing about all this weekend's games, all the red cards were red cards, despite the best efforts of xenophobic English commentators from the Midlands to say otherwise. But it was a red card. And Munster were still quite dominant, but then second half they just took the foot off the gas. I don't think Northampton came into that game. I think Munster let them into it.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think Munster are going to be terribly worried.
No.
Other than the fact that they didn't get a BP. It was job done pretty much. So Northampton, job done, and move on to Toulouse and see if you can nick a point, I suppose, is Munster's strategy.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I don't think they're going to
get a point out of Toulouse. It'll be a hell of a result for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think they're going to beat Toulouse, but they might scare them a little, and that'll do for them. Give them a bit of doubt in their minds. Be good for the rest of the competition as well. And Toulouse are at the top of that group, aren't they?
Yeah.
So their result will depend on where they finish. If Leicester win, and who's the other team? There's three teams. Anyway, I'll look it up while we're talking. But there's three teams at the top of that on 13 points, and if Toulouse don't do the business, they will find themselves in third place.
Yeah, they have a whatchamacallit. They have their own internal motivation to do well in that group. I mean, Toulouse are looking as good as they did last year, but I don't know whether saying that is a good or a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, we'll see on Sunday or Saturday. Sorry, I'm just looking this up here. Standings. La Rochelle, of course. Right?
La Rochelle, of course, yeah. Well, that leads me nicely into my next next thing we're going to discuss is Ulster against La Rochelle in La Rochelle.
What a weird.
They really are specialists at the winning try with the clock in the red kind of thing, aren't they? Rog loves a bit of drama.
There's no way you could have predicted that result. No way. Like you would have said, most people would have said, La Rochelle had scored a few tries. Whether Ulster would be in the game or not is another thing, but they were right in the game. They were winning it until a bit like us in the final last year, the last few plays of the game.
An unfortunate penalty given away, and they punished them.
Yeah. Well, like that's a great thing for La Rochelle. Like it's those kind of things stand to you, when you pull it out of the fire. It doesn't matter how bad the team are, and Ulster are in shit form currently on their going on their results. So and how they've performed in their games as well as the results of them. But it doesn't really matter how good or bad Ulster were, but the fact that La Rochelle ground out a win in tough circumstances will stand to them, because they'll know that they have that in the brain, in the tank. They'll be able to grind that out like they were against us last year in the final. So we'll see what happens there.
I kind of felt sorry for Ulster because as you say, they've been going through the horrors form wise. They are actually not that bad a team in terms of their construction, but whatever's happened to them in the last half dozen games, it's just been it's been a disaster for their season. But they look to have kind of gotten themselves together, and to a certain extent they have. Even the result doesn't change that. That's very outcome based. The performance against a team that will be perceived as significantly measurably better was still good. Okay, it came down to that last one mistake made the difference. At the top end, it often does, but Ulster aren't a team at the top end. Ulster are a team trying to claw themselves back. They're trying to get their head back over water. So I think Ulster would be able to take something out of it if they can get over the disappointment of it.
Yeah, yes, they'll be able to take something out of it, but in a funny way, it makes it all the more disheartening to have come so close to beating the champions of Europe away in their own backyard. Like, to get that, there's two ways of looking at it, and that's one of them. The other one is, hey, we nearly put the champions of Europe out in their backyard. We can't be that bad, So there are positive and negative mindsets to how you perceive it. But I think once they get over the initial disappointment of it might stand to them, like you say.
Yeah. One of the results, a game that wasn't covered on if you like on on linear TV was Connacht's absolute hammering of Brive,
Yeah.
who were in full on taking the piss mode. Um, you know, despite that, Connacht can't do anything about that. All Connacht can do is beat the team that's in front of them, and they did. And from what I saw of it, they scored some lovely tries. Jack Carthy played some real heads up rugby for a John Porteous try. Um, you know, and there's a big question at the moment, actually, about Bundy Aki's position in Connacht. Personally, I think people are reading too much into too little, and they were in a situation where they had nothing gained. Six Nations is coming up. Cathal Ford's been playing really well. Give him the run. I think that's all it comes down to.
Yeah. Somebody said this morning at the announcement of the team, which I know we're getting onto later, that Sir Bundy can't even get his game for Connacht. I don't, I don't think that's strictly true. I don't think anybody with a half a brain cell would think that Bundy Aki would be left out of a full strength Connacht team. But anyway, unless he was injured or there was a very good reason for having him on the bench to come on late or something like that. But anyway, moving swiftly along.
Yeah, so that kind of draws a line under Irish involvement in Europe this year. There were a couple of other games. You know, the rumblings in England about the South African teams carry on mainly because they're beating them, and they usually rumble when somebody's beating you, and it's the usual collection of, you know, what I think is colonialist drivel about imposing their system on every other country. And we saw it from Austin Healy as well. But the English game is in a bit of flux at the moment. Okay, the clubs that are strong clubs and with a strong base and a strong basis, like Leicester and Saracens asterisks, are, you know, I always say Saracens asterisks because it saves time putting it in later. They're going okay, whereas the teams that are always a bit of a spoofer team in flux with, you know, dodgy ownership, they're the ones having problems.
Mm. Yeah, well, the English game is just in tatters at the moment between, you know, losing two teams out of your league. That's careless. You know,
losing one is careless. Losing two,
exactly. Losing one is a tragedy, but losing two is, yeah, whatever.
I don't think Mrs. Bracknell would be impressed. Lady Bracknell would not be impressed.
I just, yeah, and if it's their salary cap is being brought down again, so like all of that mitigates against, and you could hear it. We were in the shed, the initially noisy but quite muted later on shed, and you could hear people giving out about the usual. Oh, we're playing the whole Irish team here, and you know they don't even have a salary cap. You know, basically not understanding the rugby models that they're pitted against. The beauty of Europe always was to see how the different models were pitted against each other, between the Italians, the Scots, the Welsh, the English, the French. Completely different models. Even within our league, there are different models of how to run the game. And that's the whole point of Europe, is to see how they fit together. Yeah, France have lots of money.
I don't want to come over all Ben Elton here, but the reason why there is a salary cap is because capitalists can't be trusted. The salary cap is there to stop other teams kind of cheating on other teams. But at the end of the day, it's failed. So what I think they should do is get rid of it and let the Darwinian process of, you know, free market capitalism actually sort out the game for them. It's the only thing they can do.
Yeah, well, it's the only thing they'll understand.
Yeah.
To be fair. But like, you're just going to see Saracens, Bath, and you know, two or three others shed loads of cash being sunk into it at a loss. Ultimately, it's going to end up hurting the game because just like Mitsubishi Shogun chap.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing though. There won't be shed loads of cash.
The sugar daddies are pissed off.
The guys who own the clubs are rich guys, and they didn't become rich guys by accident. They became rich guys by not doing things that would willfully lose the money.
Yeah, it's a tax write-off though for a lot of these guys, you know.
There's not that much tax to write off with the way things are going. But you know, that's the English game for you. It is what it is. Anyway, so Six Nations time around again. Before we look at Ireland, one other story from another country that would interest us is the selection of Ben Healy for Scotland. Long rumoured, now it's happened.
Yeah, and John Cooney to follow, perhaps. That's been
Yeah,
long.
there was a lot of surprise that John Cooney wasn't named in the squad today, but he's not actually eligible until round 3 anyway. So there's no point in naming him in the squad today.
That's true. That's true. He may well be named in round 3. Who
Hmm.
knows? But or he wasn't named in errors for round 3. Maybe. That's not going to happen.
We named him for round 2.
No, it's just unfortunate for Ben Healy where he's after getting himself in. Look at Munster and out halves. They've got Joey Carberry. They've got a promising young lad who seems to have has obviously usurped Ben Healy, since he's in the Irish squad. You have 2 lads that went off to Ulster. One of them is still there, allegedly. I think he's got.
No, are you talking about Bill Johnson?
No, he's gone.
Yeah, he's gone. Yeah, the other guy. Sorry, yeah, the other guy. Sorry, yeah, Flannery.
Flannery has less than 1 game in total minutes since he went there, and they're a club that have had injuries to Billy Burns. They've had all kinds of stuff. They've had Cooney playing 10, Doak playing 10. Like, if you can't, it's just unfortunate that Munster are hemorrhaging out half, and JJ Hanrahan beforehand hemorrhaging out halves who are almost good enough, or who might have been good enough if things had gone differently for them. And here they are again, losing another one now to presumably Edinburgh. I think he's going to.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's unfortunate for Ben Healy from an Irish perspective. It's great for Scotland, and it might be great personally for Ben Healy.
Yeah, I'm to a certain extent, I'm pleased for the guy that he's going to get to play or get to be close to at least international rugby, position he wasn't in Ireland. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So it's great for him. He's got another opportunity. He is half Scottish. It's not like they picked this guy off the street. They didn't just pull him out of the English market and say, "Hey boy, do you fancy playing for Scotland?" He is half Scottish, So
I thought it was just his granny, but anyway, let's not.
Well, then maybe he's quarter Scottish, but he's still part Scottish.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. Well, he'd have to be. Yeah. Anyway, people are whatever they are, and if somebody who was born and raised in England with one Irish parent considers himself Irish, that's good enough for me. Or one Irish granny considers themselves Irish. That's it's a state of mind.
I'm going to argue with you here, John. I don't like that. I don't have a problem with the system. What I don't like is the way we conflate the way that qualification rules are done in soccer and the way they're done in rugby. They've always been very, very different. In rugby, you represent the union. You don't represent the country.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to forget that.
Well, I'm just talking generally, never mind.
I know, yeah. But it's just that people say, oh, he's played for this country. How can he switch country? He's from somewhere else. How can he switch country? It's because of the way it's because of the traditional way that representative rugby has worked in rugby.
Yeah.
But no, I'm delighted for the guy, and I hope it works out for him. I hope he's very successful up in Edinburgh. Well, not too successful, but successful enough on a personal level. And the thing about Scottish rugby is they only have 2 teams.
Yeah.
They don't have those opportunities. People always say, oh, it must be heartbreaking for Scotland to be losing all their players. And their kind of system is set up for their players to come through the 2 teams and then leave, so more players can come through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's kind of a strategy, if you like. Like, Finn Russell playing and it suits them. Somebody else paying Finn Russell's wages, in this case Bath, now from next season. At least he'd be closer to home as the upside, but he might be playing in a really shit team.
Yeah.
Van Gran as a coach. So we'll see how that goes for him. But yeah, it does. Like, you're kind of building a third team of away, and usually top tier guys who are away. The downside of it, as we found out with Sexton, is you can't manage them, especially if they're in France. They want their pound of flesh, and you're not guaranteed they're going to be off for training sessions, etc. They'll literally be off for the international windows, and that's it. They won't they remember Sexton had to fly back for a game one of the break weekends, and that kind of.
I don't think the Scots are as obsessive about player rests as we are.
No, but I mean, they do contribute to injuries. I mean, Sexton did I know Sexton gets injured a lot anyway, but it's just the way he plays the game. But he did get injured and got stood down with a concussion around that time when he was in Racing. So yeah, it's a 26 game season plus knockouts in France.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah,
for
I
the
mean,
faint-hearted.
a successful French rugby player will probably end up playing over 50 games this season.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, they'll be playing all the games for, like when I say successful, I mean they're playing all the games for France. They'll probably play all the top 14 games, and they'll go quite deep into Europe.
Well, I don't know that anybody hit 50 games, but yeah,
I think if you add them up, you'll find
40
But
is a lot.
but whether that's neither here nor there, they do play. The top players do play a lot of games. Anyway, the Irish selection. One surprise and a few picks that people hadn't really gone for. I mean, obviously the surprise was that Joey Carbery wasn't selected in the team. If you like, not a surprise, but the selection that people weren't expecting was maybe Jacob Stockdale being in the squad. But
Yeah.
apart from that, it was pretty much as expected.
Jamie Osborne might have been a surprise to some. I mean, the guy's 3.5 years old, and he's in his second season with Leinster.
I think anyone who's watched him over the last 18 months, will not be surprised at his selection.
No, I mean, I'm just talking about your casual fan might be surprised at where is this guy come out of, and he is very young. Is he 21 still, I think?
21. He was 21 in November, as we were repeatedly reminded by BT Sport.
Okay, well, there you go. Like, that's I didn't see the game on telly. I was and hadn't had a chance to watch it back. But Joey Carbery, we both heard that rumor last night, or I heard that rumor and told you, and neither of us really believed it.
Yeah, I was very surprised.
And I think you asked the question, who's he left out for? And there was no answer. And the reason for that is because he wasn't replaced by anyone. There was a rumor. The other rumor we had last night was that there were going to be 4 out halves named, and he was one of them. And then in the end, there were 3 out halves named, and he wasn't one of them. Like, it's hard on him. But I would say that in the past, he's had the rub of the green. He's been backed a lot. So all of a sudden, he's not being backed, or at least this time. He could always be named for round 3 as well. You just don't know what's ahead.
Yeah, if this had happened around November, I would have been less surprised by it. But he's actually been in pretty decent form the last couple of weeks. And the one thing he has that no other out half on in the country is he covers an awful. He gives a coach a lot of tactical flexibility, because he covers a lot of positions.
Yeah.
It reminds me, like, when people compare Joey to say Ross, for example, or even Jack Crowley, although he's played 12 a lot in recent weeks. What Joe Schmidt used to say about Paddy Jackson versus Ian Madigan, he used to say, Paddy Jackson's my second choice out half, but if he's not starting, he's no use to me.
Yeah, whereas Ian Madigan was. And I knew you were going to say that, Dave, because it's the first thing he said last night when we discussed that rumor, was that he's such a flexible player, can play 15, can play 12, can play 10, and could probably fill in on the wing if he had to, in emergency break glass scenario. So yeah, you do lose a lot of experience compared to Crowley, and B, flexibility of position. But hey, he's obviously confident that Sexton and Byrne are probably going to be his go-to men for maybe the first 2 games. That it's going to be Sexton with Byrne on the bench.
Would he go up again? I'm not sure he'd go with Byrne on the bench, because I think Byrne is starter bust. I think that if you're going to have a bench player, okay, you have Ireland tend to go for a 5-3 split, which gives you a bit more flexibility, but still you want that bit more flexibility.
No, I think that Byrne is going to be on the bench, because as we saw in Australia game, he can come on and manage the game well. He's got great boot on him. He's great at clutch kicks. He's the guy you want finishing the game. Also, if Johnny Sexton goes in the first 5 minutes, he's the most adaptable. He's the most experienced player in terms of running a game like Johnny Sexton, because that's what he does for a living in his club. So I can
Oh, look,
see.
don't get me wrong. I'd have him on the bench for all the reasons you say. Um, but at international level, coaches tend to wanted more of more flexibility. So I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't.
Mm, well, like you say, a 5-3 split can make up for a lot of those. You can have
Especially suppose if you've got somebody like Jimmy O'Brien around the place.
exactly. That's covering everything. What remains to be seen. There's a lot of leads me on to something in the squad. Is there's an awful lot of back three players there. People might have been surprised with Keith Earls getting in there. Maybe that's for squad morale or for
Yeah, but the other side of that is I mean
prepping.
people.
Or he's a great player. Don't get me wrong, but
I mean
he's a winger.
he played in 4 out of the 5 games in the tour to New Zealand.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't do that if you're not hard.
Oh, I've absolutely no doubt of his hardness
Yeah.
whatsoever.
And his
No,
ability to function at that level. I mean,
no, but
Keith,
his aging legs are what would surprise me about his selection. He's just like the guy is fabulous. I love him as a player.
yeah, nails. I love him.
He seems to be a very nice bloke as well, which is obviously good for squad morale. But yeah, I just think his time is he going to go to the World Cup? Maybe he is. I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of guys like Stockdale as well. You mentioned as a surprise. I suppose he's a kind of a player that could just come out of nowhere and do something.
Yeah, I mean, 4 years ago, 5 years ago,
He was
Jacob Stockdale was
unplayable.
the best winger in world rugby,
Yeah.
unquestionably. And then a combination of injury, form, and the form of the team he's playing for as well, let's not forget,
Mm.
have caused him to drop off that radar.
He's a
Um,
confident player, you'd have to think as well, though. He's if he's not firing, he's not confident, and if he's not confident, it's a spiral there.
is there a sense that Andy Farrell thinks if he can bring him into an environment with better players in a better mind state, we'll see the old Jacob Stockdale?
Maybe. But there's certainly a lot of wingers in there. Like
Mm.
the front runners are obviously Hansen and Lowe. Lowe hasn't played a lot. He's gone back to New Zealand for personal reasons. Hope they're nothing too serious from his point of view. But he's got the jersey. You'd have to think, and Mac Hansen on the other wing.
Oh,
Uh,
I think the starting back three, injuries and absences aside, is nailed on.
mm. But then there's Jimmy O'Brien, there's Keith Earls, there's Jacob Stockdale, and isn't there another one as well? I haven't got it in front of me. But there are, it's the most amount of players that we've got. The most amount of spare players, if you like, that we've got are in the back three. There's 4 centres. There's Big Stu.
Jordan Larmour.
Larmour, that's the other one. I knew there was another one. Would you feel confident going into an international with Jordan Larmour starting it?
In his current form, yes.
Mm.
I mean, one thing people say, oh, sometimes international coaches don't pick on form, and that's true. But Jordan Larmour has been in form now for the best part of 9 months.
Yeah.
I think he's back. He's back to his best. He had that hiccup. I mean, he came blazing onto the scene, went to a certain extent like Stockdale, then had that dip. Injury didn't help. Formed lost form, but he's been back now for a while. So I don't have any worries about Jordan Larmour.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't feel bad
I wouldn't
about
necessarily play him at fullback.
Well, what I was going to say is I wouldn't feel too bad about him on the bench, but I don't know if he was one of my starting wingers. I'm not sure I'd be massively confident.
I don't
But,
know. I have to say I think he's played very well for Leinster over the last.
oh no, I'm not disputing that at all. He's having a good run of form, absolutely. But this is
Um,
professional rugby.
the centre selection is interesting now. Obviously, we talked about Jamie Osborne. You've got Gary Ringrose, who you'd have to think is nailed on. But there's Bundy Aki and Stuart McCloskey there now. Look, I'm on record. I'm a huge fan of Stuart McCloskey's, and I am a huge fan of Bundy Aki's. Do you start Bundy?
I think there is absolutely no question that Bundy Aki and Gary Ringrose are going to be starting against Wales. I'll eat my hat and half of yours if that's not the case. Obviously, barring injury. I think Stuart McCloskey and Jamie Osborne are there for the opposition on the field because let's not forget It's 37 players. You need 30 if you're going to play a match against each other, or if you're going to go backs against backs or forwards against forwards. You need 8 forwards on both teams to scrum against each other. You need, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in training, and some of the selections on the squad for a
you can bring guys in for training that don't necessarily have to be in the squad, John.
Well, that's true. That's true. But they tend to always have a full. So so there's 4 centres that can play against each other in training games. Maybe neither of the other centres will be on the bench for Wales or France. Maybe Stuart McCluskey or Jamie Osborne. Maybe neither of them are going to make the bench.
No, Osborne does actually. We were talking earlier. The one thing Osborne has in his favour over McCluskey is he does play multiple positions.
But you'd have Jimmy O'Brien to play that role.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, like in terms of those 2 guys. But yeah, I mean, Jimmy O'Brien would be your utility guy. You'd have to think anyway.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that definitely gives him the number 23 jersey, but we'll see. I mean, there are options there with Earls, Larmour, Stockdale. There's plenty of and obviously Keenan starting a full back, who I don't think we've mentioned, but he's another pretty much nailed on.
Oh yeah.
I think Jamie Gibson Park, Johnny Sexton, Bundy Yaki, Gary Ringrose, Hansen and Lowe with Hugo Keenan at full back. If that's not the back line that's named for the first 2 games, barring injury,
I'll get that FedExed over to you.
I'll be really surprised, shall we say.
In the guys who actually matter, the forwards, there were 1 or 2 surprises. In the 1 in, 1 out department, if you like. A long-term favourite of both Schmidt and Farrell, it has been Kieran Treadwell, and he doesn't make it. Whereas the young charger on the block, Joe McCarthy, does. Now McCarthy's a guy that Farrell has favoured in the past. He's picked him. He's had him around the place. And he's picked him in games. He is an international already. So
sure. I mean, he's a great young player, and he's a tough lad as well. He seems to like a bit of a scrap. He's tougher than his years. He doesn't have the dad strength yet, except he does. So yeah, you can see why he's been. That guy could have 10 or 12 years in an Irish jersey, because he's got everything. If things go well for him, he doesn't get injured, etc., etc., etc. He could have a very long career, and we could be looking back. We could be looking in 10 or 12 years at a bloke with no hair, just like we were with Paul O'Connell. Used to be this redheaded young giraffe, and ended up being the legendary Paul O'Connell with less hair. So we could be looking at this guy for something similar. There you go, Hype Train. You heard it, Hype Train here first.
His Leinster partner in the squad, James Ryan. He's a guy who, like we've said about others, burst onto the scene, then maybe dropped off a bit, accompanied with injury. But I think this year he's been as good as he's ever been. I thought he was superb against Gloucester. I really did. I thought he was absolutely brilliant. Well,
I've said it before, and I'll say it again right now. I think James Ryan is definitely better used at 4 with a big Jason Jenkins or Joe McCarthy or Ian Henderson or whoever the hell beside him, rather than playing tight headlock with Tadhg Beirne or Ross Maloney or whoever beside him. Not that he can't do that job, because he absolutely can and has for both Ireland and Leinster, but I just think he would be better used as that athletic Victor Matfield type rather than the Bakkies Botha. And his physique is kind of a hybrid of the two, really, because he's got more power than Victor Matfield, and he's got more athleticism than Bakkies Botha.
But the thing is, looking at the profile of the squad, it looks like he will be playing that tight head side again.
Possibly. If it's him and like Beirne, then absolutely, definitely. Either of the other two, though, and he could play loose headlock. It's just that little few percent less work on that side of the scrum, and it's you get back to your feet quicker. It's it's you get slightly more chance to use your athleticism rather than your bulk. But look, we'll see. That's just my biased opinion.
One athletic lock ish that was pointedly named amongst the back rows was Ryan Baird. Very, very athletic guy, which we've seen over the last couple of weeks. Another guy who burst onto the scene, had a dip. I think we're talking about a familiar kind of there's a familiar curve for Irish players when but they do. I mean, they come into the team, and it's something. It's probably you get into that level, and okay, you do great to arrive there, but you do have to establish yourself, and then you have to overcome that second season syndrome when people do actually know about you.
Mm.
And it's the third year where you really go on. Now, other guys like say James Ryan, for example, have had injuries that have interfered with that. But I think what we're seeing is this is now the standard curve.
Yeah, I'm going to credit Mick Thompson on this one. He said that back row that's named is more versatile than a bird's eye potato waffle, which I thought was a great one. But it really is, like, you can go so many directions with that. You can have big number 6 like Ryan Baird go for the maul game. You can have Peter O'Mahony in his line out prowess. You've obviously, I suppose, the staples are might squeeze the World Player of the Year in there at 7.
I wouldn't be surprised now, considering his form and everything, if they try.
Doris at 8.
No, if looking at certainly in training, they didn't look at Coombs at 6.
Yeah, well, there's another option. Like, that's why it's such a bird's eye potato waffle of a back row. It's got, like, there's so many ways you could go. You could put Peter O'Mahony at 7. You could put, you could do so many things. And Conan as an option at 8. You could go mad and put Ryan Baird at 6 and Tadhg Beirne at 8. Like,
that would be going mad. That would be going mad. But I was watching the Munster game at the weekend, and the thing that struck me about Coombs is I worked out who he reminded me of.
Mm-hmm.
And he reminded me of Picamoles.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I mean that in both, my views on Picamoles, that he was brilliant, but he only played within a relatively narrow channel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Coombs is a bit like that as well, but within that channel, he's dominant.
And
he reminds me a lot of that. And the thing about it is, I think that's tactical on Munster's part, because he's a better player than that. No, he's not a better player than that. He does that very well. So that's the wrong way to phrase it. He has skills to play a wider game than that.
Yeah, he's being compared to Picamoles is a pretty big compliment. That guy was pretty fit for a long time as well, and he was in great shape.
But do you remember when Picamoles went to Saints, and Saints ran fitness into him and made him play a wider game, and how good he was that year?
Yeah.
Coombs. I think there's a huge benefit to looking at him at 6. If nothing, just for sheer hard bastardness.
Yeah, and he is a hard bastard. That's the thing. You've got to put 2 men on him,
Yeah.
So, like, there's so many things you could do let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players named in the back row. Like, you only need 4 for a match day squad. And as long as you put in Baird, then you've got an extra second row in an emergency. You can you can go any way you like with it. It's just, and you can go different ways for different games or different ways.
You could use Coombs off 6 to grind them into the dust, and just as they're beginning to pull their muddied bodies out of the craters, they see Ryan Baird coming on and zooming past them. There's a lot we could do. It gives the coach a lot of tactical freedom and flexibility.
Yeah, I'm really liking it anyway. It's a good selection. We'll see how. I'm interested to see who the 4 back rowers are going to be on the first game day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can really pick any 4. I mean, the only thing is, the only specialist, Maria, in there is Van der Fleer. And to be honest, he's probably the only one who's nailed on anyway. Although you can probably say that Caelan Doris has done enough in the last couple of weeks or the last couple of months. But
Doris is so good that if he's not starting at 8, which is his preferred position, he'll be starting at 6. You know, you just can't
The
leave
other
it
way,
on,
the other way is that Doris has played a fair bit at 6, so they might start Coombs at 8. But I think Doris is a better footballer off the back of a scrum.
for sure.
He's just got better feet and better hands off the back of a scrum. Anyway, so that's the Ireland squad. The breakdown is 37 man. What is it? 37-man squad. 20 of them Leinster.
Yeah,
That's an
70.
awful lot. That's an awful lot of meat in one freezer.
It is, and obviously with your Leinster hat on, it's although none of the games overlap, so you probably get the non-starting 15 people back for
Cardiff.
A Cardiff, B Dragons, and C
The Granger Derby.
yeah, the Blues versus the Blues. So yeah, I don't see a huge like obviously, like you say, too much meat in the one freezer. From an Ireland point of view, is it a good thing? It's probably not. We really probably need Ulster and Munster at least to be pulling their weight. Connacht, to be fair to them, are pulling their weight to a degree. You know, they're closer to
Yeah, in
Munster.
terms of per capita kind of thing.
Well, exactly, and they're closer to Munster and Ulster than they might have been in the past in terms of performance.
People have suggested as a way of redressing this that we redistribute, certain players. We say Kelleher to so and so goes somewhere else. The other way of addressing it is for Munster and Ulster to get their fucking fingers out and start pulling their weight.
That's exactly it. That's the best way, because that's the best of both worlds. You're getting more players through then,
Yeah.
And that's, like this, the under-20s, I think, have a lot of Munster in them, which is a good thing. It'd be great if Munster outperformed Leinster and Ulster outperformed Leinster in the under-20s for a few years, because it'd get their squads into a better shape. And let's face it, like, for example,
You see the problem. So just to go with that, I don't think the problem, certainly in Munster anyway, has ever been producing players. It's been taking talent. Talent is easy to produce because you don't have to do anything. Talent is. The problem with Munster has always been bringing talented players from those under-20s through to the senior team. I mean, we were talking earlier about Bill Johnson. We were talking earlier about JJ Hanrahan. There are others as well. Whatever happened to Thomas Ahern?
Yeah, well, he's still around, isn't he?
He's still around, but the point I'm making is that they don't transition these guys into the senior team as well as they should. And that's where they fall down. Because at some point, the guy gets tired of sitting on his arse and takes transfer to Ealing Trailfinders.
Sure. To mention two guys that we haven't mentioned, Dan Sheehan and Ronan Kelleher. Like Leinster have the two of them, 23, 24, whatever age I think that's the two ages. We're well served at hooker for a good time to come. And if Munster or Ulster were to produce a few hookers that were in the under-20s, if they had the under-20s hookers for a couple of seasons, that'd be a good thing for Ireland. And Leinster
but sure, look at the last under-20s hooker Ulster produced. Who's he playing for?
Leinster.
Yeah.
Well, my point is that Leinster wouldn't necessarily suffer. Like, it'd be good for Ireland, and Leinster wouldn't suffer because we already have young players that are top notch. So, there's no real downside for Leinster. Like, sometimes there might be a downside for Leinster. Like, if Ronan Kelleher and Dan Sheehan were 32 and 33, it might be a different story, but they're not. They're 23 and 24. So it'd be great if we could just get a few more onto the treadmill and get them through the provincial systems in Munster and Ulster.
Yeah, so that brings us to kind of a story that we haven't really talked about because we've been away, but with John's community service and stuff, is the new head coach of England. Gone are the days when we could look forward to pointed barbs and thinly disguised racism from Eddie Jones.
Yeah, and your man seems to be a pretty good coach anywhere he's been as well. So he's come up quickly from the playing stage into the coaching stage and seemed to be a good unit coach very early on. So yeah, I'd be interested to see. He might get a bit of new coach bounce. And let's face it, the English team are there's some.
There's a lot of good players in it.
They're the kind
You
of
have to
team.
be doing, you have to be doing something fairly spectacular to have that team not play well.
Exactly, and they're the kind of team that we could sail through the Six Nations, beat France, and be running for a Grand Slam and get our asses kicked in the last game by England quite easily.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying that we have to beat France,
I
but
mean, I mean, we've talked a lot during the show about culture, in terms of and then you have a situation where Steve Borthwick came straight into Leicester and re-established that Leicester culture in the club, and it kind of got diluted over the years. You got Graham Rowntree trying to do something similar. Down in Munster, tried to build it on a cultural basis. People talked about Stuart Lancaster going over to Racing Metro on, and like and a lot of things he has to do is build a culture. Although I'd argue that Racing 92's culture is exactly the culture that's had for 150 years, and it's not going to change, and nothing he's going to do is going to change it, because they don't want to change. They like their bow ties and they like their champagne. Um, but Borthwick is a guy who, a bit like Lancaster when he came into England, he had to re-establish, a positive culture within that England camp, and change how those players were regarded and how they regarded their position. And Borthwick did that with Leicester, and I think he's gonna. I don't know if there's that much work, a lot of work needed with England. Maybe it's just freshening up.
Yeah, I just think people are going to discount England in the Six Nations, and
More fool them.
I think they could be a bit of a dark horse here. Eddie Jones did what he did. It might be a good gamble for Australia. Like, Australia are in absolute shit, and this is a throw of the dice. If it works, great. If it doesn't,
but are they in absolute shit, John? They didn't have a bad rugby championship.
Yeah, I just think their structures are crumbling. They're paper thin on the amount of players they have.
That's not the head coach's problem.
No, I know. I'm just talking about Aussie rugby in
Oh, in
general.
general, yeah.
Is crumbling. So, like, throwing the dice on an Eddie Jones, it's probably not a bad call, because he might just manage to round the players that they have together and turn it into some kind of a performance in the World Cup. So you just never know. He's like, he can be quite.
I mean,
he can be a divisive character, but he can also be. Look what he did with Japan, for example.
Certainly in his first couple of years in a job, he is a great coach.
There you go. So
it's what happens after those couple of years that's the problem generally with him.
Yeah, unfortunately. And yeah, it's been well documented. People have been saying it for years. And if you go back through his coaching appointments, he seems to have a.
Yeah, he reminds me of what we said of Mourinho.
He's got 3 years where most coaches have 5, where people stop listening to him. So anyway,
and that's the thing. Well, I think that's all our topics covered, John. Unless there's anything you want to discuss.
No, the other new coach in the Six Nations, who's not a new coach, is Warren Gatland, of course, who we have up first. That could be an interesting game. He's always good at getting the Welsh boys up for telling them how much they hate the Irish and stuff like that, even though they may not hate us at all. He's a good man to galvanise that team, and if a bit of new coach bounce, and
the one thing he does is he really understands how to build a club spirit within any side. If you talk to any of the guys who are saying, even on the Lions tour, how he built a club spirit within, a very disparate group on a Lions tour, but he built a very strong ethos within the group. And obviously he's done that with Wales for ages. I'm just thinking that Wales at this point aren't the Wales from 10 years ago, where they had really talented, where they had a huge amount of talented players. I'm not sure they have those at the moment.
No, and Alan Wynne Jones is running on fumes at this stage after 8 million senior caps. But
although I will say, I know you were in England, so you might have seen it, but Justin Tipuric was absolutely outstanding at the weekend.
He was great against us too.
Yeah,
He hasn't lost it. I mean, for a back rower, he's got a great bit of longevity. He's always been a player I've admired.
Yeah,
I know you have too. He's phenomenal, and he still seems to be phenomenal, which is a testament. I'm not sure what age he is, but he's not young.
I used to call him the after. I used to say that himself and Marty Holla were the two unluckiest rugby players in the world, because at various different points, they were some of the best back row forwards in the world, but just the guy ahead of them happened to be a bit special. In Holla's case, it was Richie McCaw. and in Tipprich's place it was Warburton.
Warburton, yeah. Yeah, well, we'll see how that goes. But, you look at the Six Nations and it's a contest where you see A beats B, B beats C, and you think, well, that's, C hasn't a chance against A, and then they go in and they win, lash them out of it altogether. So it's two things in it. One, it's about momentum. So, after the first weekend, only 3 teams can win a Grand Slam. So, that's how stark it is. So if you don't get the momentum, if you don't get the first game, obviously you're dead in the water. But even if you do, there are teams that you don't think of. Like, we're all focusing on England and France, and isn't it great we have them at home? But we could just as easily fall over in week 1 to Wales just because we're only at 98.7% or so, whatever.
Wales are brilliant at winning Grand Slams when nobody expects them to do anything.
Yeah. And last time I went over for the last game, I think it was 2019, and we lost in the first game, and they got a slam. And it was the red card slam, I think. I may be mixing my together, but
I'm not sure if it was. Yeah, but I remember. I know the Grand Slam you're talking about. That
before the red card slam, actually.
Chapman pulls Grand Slams out of his hat the way other guys pull, handkerchiefs or rabbits or whatever.
The guy's record in coaching is just phenomenal. I know a lot of people in this country don't like him, which is absolutely ridiculous in my book. Jesus, you should have got over the fact that he dropped Brian O'Driscoll after a week, if not sooner. 2 days it took me, but there are still some people that hold that over him. But he can be a kind of a gruff persona, but he's
likable in person, apparently.
Yeah, well, if I've met him, I've drunk whiskey with him one time, about 10 years ago, just before the 2013 Lions tour, and yeah, he's a great card player, I'd say. He's a great poker player, but I just think he's a chip on his shoulder about
2001.
People tell, well, no, not necessarily just that.
Well, I do think that he does have
he may well
feel that he was badly treated then, and he wasn't, and he's not wrong.
But I absolutely, but I think he has a thing about not bowing down to the man. I think he's got a thing about people telling him what to do. Obviously he's got his boss is the WRU, which is now Ian Evans, and it's not that he doesn't respect his, but he just has this thing in him that if people are trying to get him to do something, he'll do the opposite.
Yeah, he doesn't. He does not
stubborn streak. And he doesn't suffer fools gladly, so that might not win him friends. But I think deep in there's a really good guy, and I think there's an absolutely great coach.
Yeah, he's kind of the. I don't know if you watch Parks and Rec, but he's kind of the Ron Swanson of rugby coaches.
I haven't seen it now, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. Well, on that bombshell, I think we'll draw a veil over this. Hopefully, Jason has learned better technique, and he'll be back with us for our next episode. But thanks very much, John. Thanks very much for watching. And if you want to give us a like or a subscribe, we're still not on Instagram, nor are we ever likely to be. And we really appreciate the follow. So listen, thanks very much for watching, and see you next week.